Hello everyone. As I get started this afternoon working on my Lionel Polar Express O gauge layout, I have a couple things I need to get cleaned up before I can go too much farther. One of them has to do with the positioning of these buildings and getting them level. This particular building that we're looking at here is the grocery store. And if we zoom in a little bit closer, you could probably see that the dumpster across the back of that is about a quarter of an inch in the air, about a quarter of an inch off the surface. Uh, what that means is I need to build up the surface behind the grocery store by actually a little more than a quarter of an inch, because right now that grocery store is slanting also from front to back. So it's actually, if I raised it up to level, which I will do as I'm working on it, the distance above the, uh, of the, from the level of the plaster to the bottom of that dumpster legs would be more like 3/8 of an inch. So I'm going to need to do a few things to make that happen. One is I'm going to have to actually raise the whole uh, area behind the store so that it gets to be a more gradual rise, and I'm going to have to do something similar with the other buildings. The other buildings I used what you might consider like pier and beam building. I put piers underneath them to get them to approach level, but now that I've got them approaching level, I need to go in between the piers and actually fill in the whole bottom so that the surface underneath of all of them will be built up to the right level. And I need to bring that back to the railroad tracks. As I do that, I'm going to have some kind of a retaining wall back there that will allow me to pour the hydrocal plaster, which is this lightweight hydrocal here that I'm using for most of my plastering. It will allow me to pour that without it overflowing onto the railroad track. So I need to build up a retaining wall across the back behind at least the grocery store and perhaps the other buildings as well. To do that, I'm going to do some rock casting. Uh, that rock casting, let me show you the molds and I'll get on with that. Here are the molds that I'll be using to make the rocks that I will use to create the retaining wall. The one at the top in this scene of 4 of them is boulders, and then there's also one called embankments, one called shelf rock, and one called outcropping. I'm probably going to primarily rely on the boulders as the build-up for the retaining wall. What that means is I'll probably need to do several castings of boulders in order to get enough in order to be able to build a stone wall behind there. If I fill in a little bit with the other larger rocks that these other larger rubber molds will make, that will help me along. This is kind of what one of these looks like. This is the one that is entitled Outcroppings. So with this Outcroppings one, I'll be able to get larger rocks, and I'll also be able to get larger rocks with some of the other ones, and maybe need fewer in total to make up my retaining wall that goes along the railroad tracks. That takes a couple of steps. The first step will be to spray down the interior of each one of those molds, mist them with a mixture of 1 cup cold water and 2 drops of dishwashing detergent. Not soap, but detergent. That acts as a surfactant and allows the water to get into the cracks and crevices of the mold completely, and then also helps to release the plaster casting once it is cured. For some of the ones they can cure fairly quickly, but I usually give them 24 hours to cure in total. So this may be a little bit of a long drawn out process. I have a going to be mixing my hydrocal, filling the molds, and then allowing them to dry. And I'll come back once I have them filled and let you take a look at them. Okay, I have completed my first pour towards making the rocks that I'm going to use for the retaining wall. And you can see I ended up filling 3 molds. I had 4 prepared. I always try to prepare extras so that I'm able to use up all the material that I mix, all the hydrocal that I mix. And I had enough to fill 3 of the 4 molds that I had prepared. So these are the ones that I'll be going with as I begin to start working on my retaining wall. These need to dry now, typically for 24 hours is the length of time that I use. The mixture that I use is according to the instructions in the hydrocal container, and that is 4 ounces of cold water and 10 ounces of hydrocal. You pour the hydrocal into the cold water, let it stand for 2 minutes to absorb the water, then you stir for 2 minutes, and then you're ready to pour. There will inevitably be some bubbles in these containers. Some of those will come to the surface and rise out on their own. Others, there'll be a problem. There'll just be bubbles that I'll have to work around. Also, I want to point out to you another thing you may notice is these molds do not sit or upright the way they ought to. I mean, it wouldn't be that difficult for Woodland Scenic, when they make these, to make them so that they would be even across the bottom and they would level themselves, but they don't. You can go through the process of putting little blocks of foam or wood or something under them to level them. I just find that's too much work, and I just go ahead and fill them as well as they can. They'll be a little bit uneven in terms of the levelness of the mold, and that'll affect how deeply one end of the mold is to the other end, but in the end it's a whole lot simpler than trying to go through some process of leveling. So this is where I am now. The rocks that I'm making now will form part of a retaining wall that will go around behind the buildings and allow me to build up the material, the pave that I'm using, high enough so that the buildings are level, front to back, side to side, and little things like the, if we look at it again, little things like that dumpster on the back of the IGA store, the legs will actually touch the ground, so it'll look more natural once I'm done with that. So thanks for watching. Again, as always, I invite you to please subscribe, like, and share the video. And I also look forward to any comments that you care to share with me. I appreciate getting comments. So thanks for watching, thanks for your time, and I'll be back later with the next run as I begin to build my retaining wall.